On May 25th, 1968, a tragedy occurred that would send shockwaves through the United Kingdom and forever alter the lives of two families. A crime so shocking, so disturbing, that it would raise questions about morality, mental health, and the justice system itself. What up, guys? Captain Crime is back. Today, we delve deep into the story of a 10-year-old girl who became one of the youngest people ever convicted of murder in Britain. But the question remains, was she a cold-blooded killer or a product of an incredibly disturbing upbringing? Stay with us as we explore the chilling details of Mary Bell's case. Early life. To understand the shocking events of 1968, we first need to know a little about the girl at the center of it all, Mary Flora Bell. Mary was born on May 26, 1957 in Newcastle upon Tyne, England, to a neglectful and abusive mother. Her mother, Betty Bell, was a troubled woman with a history of mental health issues, and Mary's father was absent from her life. Betty, by many accounts, was unfit to be a mother. She prostituted herself and spent much of her time out of the house, leaving Mary to fend for herself from an incredibly young age. It's said that Betty often mistreated Mary. According to her aunt, when Mary was born, her mother yelled at the doctors to get that thing away from her when they attempted to put Mary in her arms. As a baby toddler and young child, Mary frequently suffered injuries in household accidents while alone with her mother, which led her family to believe that either her mother was deliberately negligent or intentionally attempting to harm or kill her daughter. On one occasion, in about 1960, Betty dropped her daughter from a first-floor window. On another occasion, she plied her daughter with sleeping pills. She is also known to have once sold Mary to a mentally unstable woman who was unable to have children of her own, resulting in her older sister Catherine having to travel alone across Newcastle to reclaim Mary from this individual and return the child to her mother's home. Despite her negligence and abuse of her child, Betty refused repeated offers from her family to take custody of Mary, whom she, as a dominatrix, is alleged to have begun allowing and/or encouraging several of her clients to SA in sadomasochistic sessions by the mid-1960s. Mary's mother actively participated in several of these sessions, including several in which she blindfolded her own daughter with a stocking before restraining her hands behind her back and forcing her to perform incredibly disgusting things upon her clients. By all accounts, Mary's early years were filled with neglect, cruelty, and emotional abandonment. It's important to recognize that Mary's environment was one of profound dysfunction, setting the stage for the horrifying events that would unfold. Initial assaults. On Saturday 11th, May 1968, a 3-year-old boy was discovered wandering dazed and bleeding in the vicinity of St. Margaret's Road, Scotswood. The child later informed police he had been playing with Mary Bell and her friend and partner in crime Norma Bell, who had the same name but they were not related to each other, atop a disused air raid shelter when he had been pushed 7 feet from the roof to the ground, inflicting a severe laceration to his head. He was unsure which one of the girls had pushed him. The same evening, the parents of 3 small girls contacted police, reporting that both Mary and Norma had attempted to strangle their children as they played in a sandpit. That evening, both girls were interviewed about these incidents. Both girls denied any culpability for the air raid shelter incident, claiming they had simply discovered the boy bleeding heavily from a head wound after he had fallen. Further questioned about the attempted strangulation of the 3 young girls, Mary denied any knowledge of the incident. However, Norma admitted Mary had tried to throttle each of the girls, stating, "Mary went to one of the girls and said, 'What happens if you choke someone? Do they die?' Then Mary put both hands round the girl's throat and squeezed. The girl started to go purple. I told Mary to stop, but she would not. Then she put her hands around Pauline's throat and she started going purple as well. Another girl, Susan Cornish, came up and Mary did the same thing to her. Police notified the local authority of the incidents and of Mary's violent nature, but due to their age, both girls were simply given a warning. No further action was taken. This, of course, was a fatal mistake. Murders. For context, in the 1960s, Newcastle upon Tyne experienced a significant urban renewal project. Many inner boroughs of the city saw Victorian-era terraced slums demolished in order that modern houses and flats could be constructed, although several families resided in buildings earmarked for demolition as they awaited rehousing by the council. Local children frequently played in or close to the derelict houses and upon the rubble-strewn expanses of land raised and partially cleared by contractors. One of these locations was a large expanse of a waste ground located close to a railway line known to local children as Tin Lizzie. On the afternoon of May 25, 1968, just a day before her 11th birthday, Mary sadly committed her first murder. The victim, a 4-year-old boy named Martin Brown. Bell strangled Martin in an upstairs bedroom of a derelict house located at 85th Street, Margaret's Road. She is believed to have committed this crime alone. Brown's body was discovered by 3 children at approximately 3:30 p.m. He was lying on his back with his arms stretched above his head. Aside from specks of blood and foam around his mouth, no signs of violence were visible upon his body. A local worker named John Hall soon arrived on the scene. He attempted to perform CPR to no avail. As Hall attempted CPR, Mary Bell and Norma Bell appeared at the doorway to the bedroom. Both were quickly shooed out of the house. The two knocked on the door of Martin's aunt Rita Findlay and informed her. "One of your sister's kids has just had an accident. We think it's Martin, but we can't tell because there's blood all over him." The following day, Bernard Knight conducted a post-mortem upon the body of Martin Brown. Knight was unable to find any signs of violence on the child's body, and thus was unable to determine the child's cause of death, although he was able to discount the investigator's theory the child had died of poisoning through ingesting tablets. His death appeared to be a tragic accident at first, perhaps some form of misadventure. But the investigation would soon reveal a much darker story. Days after Martin's death, the investigation took a shocking turn when a series of disturbing discoveries were made. Mary Bell, along with her young friend named Norma, was found to have had a strange interest in the crime scene. The two girls had been seen in the area before Martin's body was found, and even more chillingly, they had been drawing strange pictures depicting the death of Martin. On the day of Martin's death, Mary and Norma had also been seen near a derelict house where the body was discovered. And when police questioned Mary, she seemed unperturbed by the death, which made investigators suspicious. Police soon learned that Mary had been in the area just before Martin died. But when she was questioned, she had no emotion, no signs of guilt, and gave strange, inconsistent answers. It would soon become apparent that this was no accident, it was a case of something far more sinister. The shocking truth would soon become known. Mary Bell was not just a witness to a tragic death, she was a killer. It was not long before she would strike again. The second victim, Brian Howe. Just 2 months after Martin Brown's death, on July 31st, 1968, Mary Bell struck again. This time her victim was a 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe. On the afternoon of 31st July 1968, a 3-year-old boy named Brian Howe was last seen by his parents in the streets outside his house playing with one of his siblings, the family dog, and Mary and Norma Bell. When he didn't return home later that afternoon, concerned relatives and neighbors searched the streets without success. At 11:10 p.m., a search party discovered Brian's body between two large concrete blocks upon the Tin Lizzie. The first police officer to arrive at the scene observed that a deliberate but feeble attempt had been made to conceal the body, which was covered in clumps of grass and weeds. Cyanosis, a condition where skin turns blue-gray color due to a lack of oxygen in blood, was evident upon the child's lips, and several bruises and scratches were evident upon his neck. A pair of broken scissors lay close to his feet. The coroner would conclude that Brian had died of strangulation and that he had been deceased for up to 7.5 hours before the discovery of his body. The killer had squeezed Brian's nostrils closed with one hand as he or she had gripped his throat with the other. Numerous puncture wounds had been inflicted to the child's legs before death, sections of his hair had been cut from his head, his genitals had been partially mutilated, and a crude attempt had been made to carve the initial M into his stomach. Imagine how sick and degenerate someone must be to do something like that. The small amount of force used to murder the child led the coroner to conclude the killer was another child. Numerous gray and maroon fibers were discovered upon Brian's clothing and shoes. These fibers did not source from any clothing within the Howe household and had been transferred to the child by his killer. All evidence pointed to a cold, calculated murder. Mary Bell and her accomplice Norma were once again in the area. This time Mary was seen leading Brian into the house, and shortly afterward his lifeless body was discovered. After Brian's death, the police became more focused on Mary. They found evidence that she had been involved in both murders, evidence that was impossible to ignore. The discovery of Brian Howe's body sparked a large-scale manhunt. Over 100 detectives from across Northumberland were assigned to the investigation, and over 1,200 children were questioned about their whereabouts by 2nd August. 2 children questioned by detectives on 1st August were Mary Bell and Norma Bell, who witnesses informed investigators had been seen playing with Brian shortly before he was believed to have died. In her initial interview, Norma seemed excitable, whereas Mary was markedly more observant and reserved. Although both girls were evasive and contradictory in their initial statements, they freely admitted to having played with Brian on the date of his death, but denied having seen him after lunchtime. Mary stated she remembered seeing an 8-year-old local boy playing with Brian on the afternoon of 31st July, and that she had also seen him hitting the child. Furthermore, she said she also remembered the boy had been covered in grass and weeds, as if he had been rolling in a field, and that he had a small pair of scissors. Mary then expounded. I saw him trying to cut a cat's tail off with the scissors, but there was something wrong with them. One leg was broken or bent. This self-incriminating statement convinced Detective Chief Inspector James Dobson that Mary was the actual killer, as only the police knew about the broken scissors found at the crime scene. In addition, the local boy she named was quickly questioned and was discovered to have been at Newcastle Airport on the afternoon of 31st July, with numerous witnesses able to confirm his parents' claims. On the afternoon of 4th August, the parents of Norma Bell contacted police, stating their daughter wished to confess what she knew of the death of Brian Howe. DCI Dobson arrived at their home, formally cautioned Norma, then asked what she knew. Norma then informed Dobson Mary had taken her to a spot on the Tin Lizzie, at which point she had been shown Brian's body. Mary had then demonstrated to her how she had strangled the child. According to Norma, Mary had confessed to her she had enjoyed strangling the child before describing how she had inflicted the score marks on his stomach with a razor blade which had been hidden at his crime scene and the broken scissors. Norma then led the police to the crime scene and revealed the location where the razor blade was hidden. A drawing Norma made of the wounds inflicted to the boy's abdomen precisely matched those described by the coroner. Later the same day, Norma was questioned again. On this occasion, she made a full statement admitting being present when Mary had strangled Brian. According to Norma, when the trio were alone on the Tin Lizzie, Mary seemed to go all funny, pushing the child into the grass and attempting to strangle him before stating to her, "My hands are getting thick, take over." She had then run from the scene, leaving Mary alone with Brian. A forensic examination of clothing owned by both girls revealed the gray fibers discovered upon Brian's body were a precise match to a woolen dress owned by Mary. The maroon fibers upon the child's shoes were a precise match to a skirt owned by Norma. Furthermore, the same gray fibers had also been found upon the body of Martin Brown. Both girls were then arrested. Shortly after their arrest, both girls underwent psychological evaluations. The results of these tests revealed Norma was intellectually delayed and a submissive character who easily displayed emotion, whereas Mary was a bright yet cunning character prone to sudden mood swings. Occasionally, Mary was willing to talk, although she rapidly became sullen, introspective, and defensive in nature. The 4 psychiatrists who examined Mary concluded that, although not suffering from a mental disorder, she suffered from a psychopathic personality disorder. In his official report compiled for the Director of Public Prosecutions, David Westbury concluded, "Mary's social techniques are primitive and take the form of automatic denial, ingratitude, manipulation, complaining, bullying, flight or violence." The trial. Legal and ethical dilemmas. In December 1968 at 11, Mary Bell stood trial for the murder of Martin Brown and Brian Howe. The court proceedings raised several important questions about the nature of Mary's actions and her mental state. Was she a heartless murderer, or was she a victim of circumstances beyond her control? On the 5th day of the trial, Norma testified in her own defense. She denied any culpability in the actual murder of either child, but admitted under cross-examination to having known Mary's penchant for violence and her history of attacking children, and that the two had discussed attacking and killing small children of both genders. Questioned by Rudolph Lyons as to whether Mary had demonstrated to her how children could be killed, Norma nodded. She then conceded that, as Mary had begun to attack and strangle Brian Howe, she had failed to alert a group of boys playing in the vicinity, stating that she had failed to do so as "I did not know what was going to happen in the first place." She had stopped hurting him for a bit when the boys were near the concrete blocks. Questioned as to her own role in the murder, Norma stated she had never touched the child. Mary's defense argued that she was suffering from mental health issues, including a disturbed and traumatic childhood. They suggested that her violent acts were a result of her upbringing, abuse, neglect, and emotional scars left by a mother who was unfit to care for her. Following the conclusion of Norma's testimony on 12 December, Mary testified in her own defense. Her testimony lasted for almost 4 hours, concluding on 13 December and was briefly adjourned on one occasion when she began crying in a policewoman's arms. She denied her co-defendant's accusations, insisting that although she had observed the body of Martin Brown at St. Margaret's Road, she herself had never harmed the child, and that she and Norma had later asked the boy's mother to view his body as the two were daring each other and one of us did not want to be a chicken. Mary also conceded she had divulged to others her knowledge of Martin's death could get Norma put straight away. Questioned with regards to the death of Brian Howe, Mary claimed that Norma had been the individual who had strangled the child, as she herself was just standing and looking. "I could not move. It was as if some glue was pulling us down." Mary then alleged Norma had encouraged Brian to lie down if he wanted some sweets, telling him, You've got to lie down for the lady to come with the sweets, before proceeding to strangle him with her bare hands as she herself unsuccessfully attempted to prevent the attack. Mary further stated she could determine the level of force Norma had exhibited because her fingertips and nails were going white, and again conceded she had failed to inform authorities of her knowledge of Norma's actions out of both fear and a misguided sense of loyalty. Norma's mother, Catherine, then testified that several months prior to the killing of Brian Howe, she and her husband has discovered Mary attempting to strangle Norma's younger sister Susan, and that she had only released her grip on their daughter's throat after her husband had punched Mary in the shoulder. A child psychiatrist named Ian Fraser then testified that Norma's mental age was 8 years and 10 months, and that although her capacity of knowing right from wrong was limited, she could appreciate the criminality of the acts she was accused of committing. The prosecution, however, argued that Mary was fully aware of her actions, stating that she was a cold, calculating killer. The court had to decide whether she should be held fully accountable for her crimes. In the end, the jury found Mary Bell guilty of manslaughter, not murder, on the grounds of diminished responsibility. She was sentenced to life in prison, but because of her age, it wasn't clear how long she would serve. The aftermath. Mary Bell was transferred between numerous prisons until her release in May 1980 at the age of 23. She served a total of 11.5 years for her horrific crimes. The whereabouts of Mary Bell today are unknown. She received lifetime anonymity upon her release from prison. However, she has both a child and a grandchild and continues to reside in the Tyneside area where she murdered those 2 young boys all those years ago. Guys, I have to tell you, after cases like that, I always wonder in what kind of sick world we are living, where children are killing children. It's just impossible to imagine sometimes. I guess if you are just safe and healthy and have people who love you, you can already consider yourself as very happy and very lucky. Anyways, the case of Mary Bell remains one of the most controversial and debated in British criminal history. The question remains, was she a born killer or was she simply a product of a world that failed her? To this day, the debate continues, of course. Now my question is, what do you think, guys? Was Mary Bell a victim or a cold-blooded killer? Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth stories like this one. And as always, stay safe, guys. Captain Crime, over and out!